Hello, I'm Maria Ressa. Today we're sitting with Chai Hofilenya and Miriam Grace Go, authors of Ambition, Destiny, Victory, the Philippines' best-selling book on the 2010 polls. They are also colleagues at Rappler. Welcome to #PHvote, a discussion on the state of Philippine politics and the upcoming 2013 elections. If you haven't already, join the online social media conversation with @rappler.com using #PHvote and send us the questions that you have. Our lady authors will be responding. First question that was thrown out on Twitter earlier today is the first question I'll toss out to our experts. How would you describe Philippine politics today?
I would say it's still very personalistic. It's media driven and very traditional.
Gigi?
There are some attempts to discuss issues, but actually you can only go so far because you will still have to adapt the entertainment strategies to get your messages across when you're trying to discuss issues, and it's very limited.
So jumping off of that, what tactics worked in the 2010 elections? What got people elected?
I think the use of the media was certainly a very, very critical, played a very, very critical role. Political ads, on stage, for example, there was a lot of there was some entertainment values that were put in, and very, very heavy use of television in particular, more than radio and even print. A little of social media, on Twitter and Facebook, but really heavy on television.
Media was the determining factor, or only one?
For the presidential position, I think the very positive play on Noynoy Aquino helped a lot to seal his initial lead, actually to reverse the initial survey rankings. So he overtook Villar, and media.
Now we have midterm elections, senatorial elections coming up. And what do you see from the in-depth look you took at the 2010 elections? What do you see will carry over to the 2013 elections?
I think we'll still have media.
Yes.
It's the same factor, and according to experts that we've interviewed, if in 2010, I think people were looking at programs and platforms, and even to a certain extent, political parties. For midterm elections, there will be less of that. People will look for entertainment. People will look for personalities. People will look for endorsements, and that you will see that again through political ads. And there will be a lot of these ads that will be seen on the airwaves, on television.
What role do you see social media? Is it different this time around?
I think people who are really engaged online will just maximize what social media has to offer. We're talking about strategists who will use it, Facebook, Twitter, and everything, to promote their candidates, and also on the side of the voters, to get information about candidates. It's really just maximizing what social media, but it's still TV will be the number one.
Interestingly, I think more than 20% of Filipinos are on social media, have access to the internet, and of those who have access to the internet, a huge percentage, more than 90%, use Facebook.
Correct.
And if you are a candidate, and if you know that you're in for or you are in a very, very tight political contest, I'm sure that they will use social media. So, for example, among the 6 incumbents in the Senate, I think there are about 4. All of them are on Facebook, and there are only 2 of them. This is, if I remember right, Alan Peter Cayetano and Trillanes, who are not on Facebook. No, sorry, they are not on Twitter, but they are on Facebook. So you see this attempt or this effort to have a presence on social media.
What about any other lessons? I mean, we've been talking about educating voters for so long, since 1986. I mean, have you seen any progress moving forward?
Progress. Actually, that's a challenge. That's what that's what political strategists and that's what some of the politicians themselves say, that we precisely know that media plays a very, very important role. Therefore, part of the challenge and part of the burden and part of the responsibility lies with media. That if for example, like we've seen recently, some performances in the Senate.
Yes.
We
Tito
should.
Soto?
Well,
Performances? Okay.
yes. So if we see something like that, then we point it out so that hopefully voters remember that, so that when next year elections come next year, they remember that we shouldn't be voting these types of personalities to the Senate.
The problem is we're always putting the burden on the politicians and the strategies to bring the discussion to a higher level, but the voters also have a responsibility to, you know, be more engaged, be more responsible, to know more, because even if a politician would want to have a campaign that is issue-based, he really has to strike a balance between the entertainment that people want, the shallow discussions that most people want, and, you know, in designing the messaging of his or her campaign.
Well, let's talk about President Aquino now. One of the highest popularity ratings, 77%. Will this translate to his slate?
No.
No.
No,
No,
both leagues.
no.
Okay, so he's got a challenge ahead. Why?
Yeah, precisely because number one, political parties, ideologies don't really matter in elections, more so in local elections. As I said earlier, for presidential campaigns, maybe to a certain extent, programs and platforms would matter. People will look for them. But then when it comes to local candidates,
It's still who helped me most,
yes,
who
Social
I know
networks,
personally.
Yes.
loyalty,
patronage
patronage
driven,
driven.
personality, very personal relationships. These are the things that will determine how people will vote. And they also say that sometimes because you have a long list to fill, for example, for the Senate, people tend to be less discriminating. They would say, oh, anyway, if
I have 12.
I have 12 to choose from, I put in 6 who I really think would be very good. The other 6 maybe would be compensated for by the 6 good ones. So just include them anyway.
So jumping off of that, what role will political parties play any role in these elections?
Not the national parties. I've always said that there are no real national political parties, because their real network are the local parties with which they coalesce. So it's really the local parties that will matter, how strong they are in their localities, what issues they push, or who are the personalities behind them. This will determine the local and how that local will deliver for the national vote.
It sounds like it's a chicken or the egg question. It's our culture that determines the quality of our democracy, and yet our politics is determined by the state of feudalism and patronage in our politics. Do you see this cycle? Where do you see this cycle being broken? Is it going to be happening in our lifetime, or maybe hopefully in 2013?
Not in 2013.
Not in
It's as you said, it's a deeply entrenched political culture which you cannot undo in just 6 years. That's why I think this is also the reason why some people are pushing for a constitutional change, parliamentary form of government, because there, whoever you put in power will have more time to put long-term reforms in place.
But even in a parliamentary form of government, like in Indonesia, for
Yeah.
example, Suharto used parliament as a rubber stamp. So in the end, it still depends on the culture that's there.
It's true, correct.
What can make these elections different? What's important about the 2013 elections?
For me, if you want to have changes, it has to start at the local level.
Okay.
If people are very parochial in their thinking, and don't really give serious thought to who they are electing nationally, then please at least think hard before you vote for your local candidates, because you will have packets of, reformists and, best practice LGUs.
For example, if you just to add to that, if you think of local in Naga, this is what Jesse Robredo was able to do, and look at, I think all of us were surprised by the impact that he had on the national level. We thought
Correct.
that he was just a former mayor of,
Yes.
of this city.
Yeah, they used to think it's just Naga.
Yes,
Yes,
but
yes.
We were just surprised that he was able to do all these many things. He was able to eradicate wetting and the efficient delivery of services. So if it can start, if it can happen in one city,
Yes.
and you multiply that in several areas,
Yes.
you can just realize the impact
A
of that
tipping
on the
point.
national scale.
And yet, when he was in office, I mean, few people really looked at what he was able to accomplish, and he seemed to be floundering a bit in national politics.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you were to look at what things could be done now for the voters, what should they be looking for? What can they do?
For the voters.
Well, at least, for starters, check the minimum qualifications for elected officials. At least you have an idea of what a certain position requires, what a person occupying that office is supposed to do. And if you can really tell that this person doesn't have the expertise or the experience to do those exact things, then don't consider them at all.
But Gigi, are our voters that rational?
Well, they should be, they should have had enough of, politicians who don't deliver.
Maybe the basic thing is we should just tell people to stop voting clowns. But people also say that poverty is also a factor.
Okay.
You go to the poorest provinces, and the voters in these provinces are probably the most vulnerable to vote buying, and that's where the problem begins, because then they will vote people from whom they could get the most
Immediately.
Yes, and they will not think about ideology or
The next
or
3
programs.
years. Yeah.
In what you said earlier, that seems to be the way it will play out again in 2013. And again, I asked you whether things are going to change. Some things have changed. We've impeached and convicted a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Do you see any of these national events affecting the psyche, the zeitgeist, enough to actually affect the 2013 elections?
Locally, no. I don't
No.
think people are very much into a Chief Justice being impeached. It's very much like in 2001 when you kicked out Arab.
Correct.
It didn't have any effect on the local voters. They still thought that Arab was popular. He was their hero, and it was okay to get wedding bribes because everybody's doing it anyway. So it really, yeah.
But I'd like to think that if there are pockets of reform happening at the local level, this has to be complemented by the top. So the president, Malacanang national officials should also be sending the right messages and should be sending the correct signals. Like, for example, if considering that Noynoy Aquino ran on a platform of anti-corruption,
Correct.
that has to be consistent all throughout. And
Yes.
then people will realize, local government officials and people who will run for local office will realize that this is the dictate from the top. This is the new standard that we must adhere to and we must try to replicate.
But your problem is your president is maintaining factions in his administration. So
Could you say that louder, please?
factions. There are factions in
president
the
is maintaining
administration.
factions.
So you can expect that not all the officially or the official candidates will be determined by the ruling party, by the Liberal Party. There can be local candidates who are being secretly supported by the other factions. So it will send a mixed signals.
So
to
even the
voters.
ruling party itself is
Yes.
divided. In the past,
Actually, it's not the ruling party that's divided. There's just one LP. It's the other faction that is outside the political parties. So.
local elections in the past have always been violent. Do you expect this to be the case? Do we see anything changing? I mean, the old guns, goons, and gold, is this going to change?
I think it's violence has been there for a number of provinces only. It's not like it's national,
But I think there are some areas also where I think it's finding the correct formula, the right formula.
Okay.
For example, in Masbate, I was told that in the last elections there was less or practically none who were killed, when traditionally it would be a
It was a
hotspot.
hotspot. Yes,
and
yes.
and this was because they just flooded the area with soldiers,
Okay.
just so there's intimidation coming from other political parties could be
I
minimized.
remember that in 2010.
Yeah.
Was that in 2010?
So
Yeah.
in the armed provinces, for example, traditionally these would be very, very problematic in terms of cheating and in terms of violence. So I don't know if maybe learning from the Masbate experience, they can do that also in the armed provinces.
Gigi, in terms of local elections, what will win? What tactics will allow
Well,
candidates to win?
early organizing definitely would do the trick. Your early grounding.
Mhm.
As we said in another book that we wrote, it's good grounding precedes everything. So people are asking why we're discussing elections this early. I'm always telling them that it's because politicians start organizing a year before the election, so journalists should be doing the same.
It's
Good grounding.
it's a lot of groundwork that needs to be done. And if you're a candidate in 2013 and then you just start organizing this October when you file your candidacy, it's really too late.
Yeah.
So as Gigi has said, you start organizing on the ground at the precinct level a year or even years before actual elections.
You talked about how important media was in the 2010 elections, television in particular. Now that you have people on social media and candidates will be using social media, can people on social media do anything to elevate the level of discussion or to try to get more substance in the debate?
Well, I'd like
That doesn't look so promising. Please, ladies.
We try to be optimistic. We
Yeah.
try to be positive in terms of outlook, but it's still a very, very small percentage, 20%. And if you look at local elections, it's really the massa, and
Yes.
they don't have access to social media, so it's still very limited, the impact.
During the 2010 elections, we had debates playing actually a large role. For example, in Lauren Lagarde's situation, she was one of the top candidates. She was the top for vice president, and then a bad performance really triggered her. What role do you see debates playing in the upcoming elections?
I think for debates would work for people running for national office, but for local, maybe senatorial, yes. But for governor, mayors,
You're basically saying there's no substance in the 2013 elections
Yes.
coming up. Gigi, you agree?
Yes.
I think the more substantial discussions would be at the local level, because this is where you really come face to face with the voters. The politicians get to explain issues. National elections, especially senatorial, are really just always TV performance, how you project yourself, if you're saying the right or the wrong thing. It's always, you have to put on a show, and you really have limited time to discuss.
but I'd still like to think, I'd like to believe, I hope that among senatorial candidates, precisely because all of them will be on television, all
Yes.
of them will have political ads anyway, some of them would try to stand out and try to be different by being very, very clear about their
Their message.
messaging and their platforms. That way they say that, hey, there may be 12 or more of us who you watch on television, but I'm different.
Actually, I think the battle between senatorial candidates will really be in terms of messaging. I mean, everybody can put out ads, but who has the sharpest and the simplest message?
A question from @2013 Poll Watch. Why do people like sing song and dance? Will they listen to a candidate discussing the national budget?
Obviously they won't, because you talk about the budget, you talk about figures, you talk about GNP, GDP, inflation, everybody's going to sleep. So think of it in terms of holding a rally, for example.
Yes.
The best way to keep the crowd's attention is song and dance.
That's
It's really the limited time that each candidate is given. I mean, I think it's one thing that we should change in elections is we have very short campaign periods.
Yes.
So in 90 days, you will have to go to 80 provinces.
Yes.
Meet all the voters in at least the key cities, and then be given 3 minutes to say your message. So you will just dance.
What do you think of online campaigns like Apple Watch? The citizens who are looking at Apple Watch, is that good or is that bad?
I think they're great.
Yeah, helpful.
Because a lot of the people who are on social media are young people.
Yes.
And these types of campaigns actually appeal to the youth.
Okay.
And the youth are very dynamic. They can replicate. They can replicate the message and quickly spread it out. And this has this. I think that's one potential of social media that can be explored and maximized.
You said 20%, right? I think the last statistic said 33%, which would be
higher.
33
So
million.
that's higher.
33
Yes.
million, about a third of the population on the internet, which is still not enough.
But
If these are,
promising.
if these are people who are very opinionated and who can help shape the opinion of other people, especially young people online.
They're certainly very opinionated, which is why you should send more questions to Chai and to Gigi, hashtag PHvote. I'll read some of the interesting comments that have come in from @LeeRold. Philippine politics is more showbiz than public service. Every move, every action, and every progress in media, which is basically the same things you both said. From @YLLO5 Yee. Officials in the local level are now getting the list of voters in their places, and when election comes up, it's easy to bribe them. Corruption. What role will this play in the 2013 elections?
Vote buying will still be there, even if we have automated elections. Although I think to a great extent, automation could reduce that. But in poorer provinces and poorer areas, that will still be a major factor.
Gigi, with the automated elections, and this is the same.
I just
Go ahead,
want
go
to
ahead.
make a clarification,
Please.
on the comment. When politicians get the voters list, it's not always to know which people to bribe.
bribe.
Sometimes it's to determine in what barangays or precincts they are weak, so they can work harder.
That's great. So it's not always a
It's not
negative
always.
thing. But there is actually strategy at the levels.
Yes.
What are the
Or
bra-
sometimes
Go ahead.
when they find out in what precincts they have less voters, they try to bribe the local COMELEC so they will delist the voters of the other camp. So there are many reasons why the voters list is.
What things can people be vigilant about at the local level now? What should they be looking out for? Is there anything in particular?
Misinformation, the usual.
So propaganda again, which has been used so effectively.
I mean, if you're residing in in that area, at least know what is really happening, so that people cannot be misinformed. You cannot mislead you. That's one step.
Okay.
If
Go
there's
ahead,
just
Chai.
one thought crossed my mind.
Yes.
When we were talking about social media a while ago, it's actually also one way of getting people to vote, getting people more involved. Because I think if we look at the trend compared to national elections, the vote. Correct me, Gigi, if I'm wrong. The voter turnout for local elections is usually lower than for national elections. So if we can use social media, for example, to encourage people to go out, then maybe they could make a difference in the numbers.
Last question we'll take from social media now is from @TeachDiwa. How do we draw the line between plain product endorsement and early campaigning?
Product endorsement is actually early campaigning. It's just that there's no vote for me written on it. So
This would go under the Apple Watch, would you say? Or no?
yes, of
Not really.
course.
Yes.
I mean, if you're a politician or if you're an incumbent, what's your business endorsing any product? I mean, journalists are not supposed to endorse products, so why should incumbent elected officials?
We're such a schizophrenic country. Ladies, your last words before we move on. Gigi,
Last words.
looking forward to 2013. I mean, how do you see it shaping up, and why is it important?
Okay. It's difficult.
I think for me, 2013 is important because it will also give us an indication of how serious the present administration is in being true to its platform or to its campaign promises of being anti-corruption and pushing for good governance. We have to look at which candidates they would include in their senatorial slate, which candidates they would be, who are the candidates that the president would be endorsing, and who the Liberal Party will be pushing. The difficulty here is there are bound to be compromises that will have to be made in certain areas, and that's to be expected. But what's worth watching is how far will these compromises be made.
Gigi.
Please watch and take seriously your local elections. It's your way of telling the national leaders that you don't necessarily have to belong to the same party or support the same national candidates. But if you both want something good for the country, they will just, you will be doing or choosing wisely at the local level.
Fantastic. Ladies, thank you so much for giving us not such an optimistic view, but a realistic view of elections. We've been speaking with Chai Hofilenya and Miriam Grace Go, authors of Ambition, Destiny, Victory, best-selling book on the 2010 polls. They looked ahead. #PHvote will continue in the weeks leading up to elections. They'll continue the conversations on Facebook, so if you have any other questions, please go to Rappler.com on Facebook and send them your questions. I'm Maria Ressa. Thank you for joining us.